Hey, what's up? Guess what I got, man? The car keys. Yeah, let's go hang out at Griffin Radio, figuratively. Hello, and welcome to The Social Distance, a podcast where we just get to hang out and enjoy the view. Don't worry, I am driving, you are in the passenger seat, you get to just enjoy the view from the window. You go crazy, man. I got my eyes on the road, we're gravy, we're chilling. It is April 16th, 2020, and I am your host, Israel Rodriguez. Hey listeners, how are you today? Yeah, I still can't get over that beautiful drive. I mean, we were jamming to the Strokes the whole time. That new album, it was fantastic. We were listening to it in its entirety. I appreciate that. That was so much fun. By the way, cool beach towel. I didn't know you were a fan of Dig Dug as well. That's good to know. I'm glad I know that about you. Now, if you haven't have noticed, we are currently at the beach right now. And if you really haven't have noticed, these are all sound effects. That's a bird. I did that. I can do it again. I actually just wanted to make you guys feel like you were hanging out with me at the beach, just enjoying the outside air, just like the old days, am I right? No, I'm just kidding. But really though, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for listening. It's me, Izz, your host, and that one friend who will always let you drink as much oolong tea as you'd like. Life is too short to let anyone stop you from enjoying oolong, or anything, really. It is Thursday, and if you have listened to the previous episodes, you'll know that's when we get to hang out. And if you haven't listened, please exit the premises. Nah, I'm just kidding. You know that without a doubt, you are always welcomed here. I hope you all have been doing well since the last time we have spoken. For those of you who celebrated, I hope you had a good Easter. And for those of you who don't, I hope you had a good Sunday. I know for myself, me and my roommates actually got together and just made some good food. We had salmon, asparagus, we had some chicken, some mashed potatoes, some cornbread. It was just a good time. I was very grateful that in the midst of all this uncertainty, I was able to have a day where, it kind of allowed me to try to live in the moment as much as I can, despite, all the weirdness hanging in the air. So it was a good Sunday. It was a good Easter. I hope you guys had one with similar experiences. I truly do. And for those of you who are not able to enjoy the holiday because of these circumstances, I appreciate what you're doing out there, and I'm going to try to send the bestest of vibes to all of you guys. Thank you for listening. Another thing I did during our time away from each other, which was agonizing by the way, was I was trying to learn to play Aeroplane by the Red Hot Chili Peppers on bass. And if you have not heard that song, please do. That's your homework. I don't know if I'm allowed to assign that, but I did. That bass line is like the boss battle in a video game. It is pretty intense. Another thing I did was go to the dentist. I know it is a weird time to be seeing the dentist right now, but trust me, tooth pain stops for no one. Absolutely no one. Oh, and I have also been doing some reading, which is a great way and a totally coincidental way to bring up today's topic, which is books. Today is going to be kind of like a book review day. Right next to me, I have I want to say burgundy colored notebook, and it has like a felt to it. It feels very like it's made out of some sort of cool material. And on the cover of it is a bunch of angles that are less than 90 degrees, and in the middle of the book it says a cute notebook. Now, I bought this only for myself to enjoy, so I'm sorry that you had to enjoy that bad pun. Yes, you did enjoy it. But this book contains all of my book reviews that I've started writing in the last couple of months. I know it's kind of odd, and I never intended to share this with anybody. I just wanted to keep track of some books that I read. Now, I do want to say that I used the term review a little bit loosely. I just jotted down some ideas of what I thought of the book that I was reading at the time, and then I gave it a little numerical value review at the end of it as well, and I'm just going to share that with you. These are just 12, 13 books that I jotted down over the couple months, and it's not going to get into depth, not too in depth. Even if you're not a reader, please stick through. I think we're gonna hang out and just discuss some of these books, some ideas, almost like two people talking about some of the movies they've seen or some of the things they've been through. It's going to be chillin'. We're going to have a good time. I got into my reading journey, I want to say about 2 years ago. I never was too into books before that. In high school, I kind of just looked online for the summaries of the books that I had to read, and I thought reading was kind of a waste of time. It wasn't until a little later in my adult life that I found the beauty in books. And now I just feel like I'm off to such a late start. There's so much to read out there. I also want to let you know that I am a huge fan of the author Kurt Vonnegut. I'm telling you that now because as I read through these book reviews, you will see that I have read a number of his books. I think he's a fantastic author, and I still to this day keep reading his books. I'll talk more about that later. For now, let's get ready. Let's start talking about some books. Alrighty, friends, enough of that ear spaghetti. Let's get started with these book reviews. The first review I got in this little journal of mine is a book by the one, the only Kurt Vonnegut. This book is titled Wampeters, Foma, and Granfalloons. That may seem like gibberish, but those are actually terms that Kurt Vonnegut made up for his previous novel, which was Cat's Cradle. This book in particular is actually a collection of interviews and essays by Kurt Vonnegut, and I do want to point out that this book is mostly nonfiction, which is an unusual departure from his bizarre and humorous, even sci-fi-like type fiction that he is usually known for. In fact, this was actually my first experience with his nonfiction writing. I do want to say that this book came out in 1974, and me having read it in 2019, I thought, and still do think, that it is way ahead of its time. He writes about his own experiences and travels, and he touches on a lot of subjects such as morals, writing, kindness, wars, and just the overall complexity of humanity. To me, this book is a prime example of the classic phrase, food for thought. The concepts that he tackles actually require you to be reading and thinking actively. You gotta focus because Vonnegut's way of thinking just has a lot of density and a lot of like twists and turns, so, you just gotta make sure you're on guard. You gotta be ready for what he's gonna tell you. Vonnegut definitely has some interesting, well thought out views, and I do think they're worth diving into and discussing. It almost feels, when you're reading this book, as if you're having a conversation with him at a bar, drinking your favorite beer, or your favorite kombucha, or just drinking a very refreshing glass of water, and you guys are just discussing. You guys are just hanging out, low stakes, and really getting to know each other through experiences and through stories. And I'm definitely not saying that some of the things he talks about are not serious. He does talk about some serious things in there, but he does sprinkle it with his Vonnegut charisma, and it just really is presented to you in a way that is approachable. These concepts that I didn't even think about approaching in my own day-to-day life, he brought them to me in a platter, he served it to me, and I ate it up. So I gave this book an 8 out of 10, but I did acknowledge that I might be a little biased because I admire this guy, so take that with a grain of salt, but don't, because it's great. The next book that I wrote about was a book titled How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. This book was actually recommended to me by a stranger at Barnes & Noble, and it was actually a really cool happenstance. Me and this guy just started talking, and he didn't recommend it in a rude way or in a weird way or anything. He was just like, yeah, this book was really important to me. You might find something from it. So I did. I ended up picking up that book that day, actually. Although this book was written in 1936, it is still full of applicable knowledge for sure on how to communicate, actually, I forgot to mention that this is a self-help type of book that is literally full of ideas and techniques on how to communicate, how to navigate through your day-to-day interactions and relationships, both business-related and personal. Dale Carnegie does this by using anecdotes from his own life and classes as well as mentions of historical leaders such as Abraham Lincoln. It was a neat read, though I do have to be very honest with you. I never thought that I had any real communication problems to begin with. I know that sounds kind of arrogant, but honestly, I don't mean it with those intentions. I do pride myself in my ability to speak and connect with others because it is something that I consciously work on and I have worked on over the years. Communication was even my major at some point. So, a lot of the information here was like an echo, kind of many lessons that I had already tried incorporating into my own connections with others. But repetition is an effective way to drill these ideas into your head. So, I didn't find it too completely inane to read, but I did give this book a 6.5 out of 10, and that's because it definitely had a great idea in it, but in my opinion, it was just geared towards those who are truly lost in the art of communication. And if that sounds like you, then that might be a good read for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all have our strong points and our weaker points. I think for me personally, it just wasn't my favorite book to read. Alrighty, so up until now, I have actually been paraphrasing what I wrote down in this notebook of mine with all the book reviews. I've been paraphrasing it and just kind of letting you know the overall gist of what I thought of the book based on these things. But this next one, I actually just am gonna read straight from what I wrote down because I think it's their opinions that are still relevant now, and I couldn't have described it better now the way I did then. So I'm just gonna read from it. Sirens of Titan, Vonnegut's second novel, is an absolutely marvelous sci-fi adventure that takes the reader through a number of planets and civilizations while introducing fantastic theories and ideas about human nature, fate, free will, and the importance of inwardness. Vonnegut exhibits these concepts using his notorious wit and humor through his colorful and intricate characters and their entertaining, keen dialogue and interactions. The book captured my interest right from the very beginning by touching on humans' needs to find meaning in life, and then kept my attention by telling the curious story of Malachi Constant. Though this novel isn't as humorous and as absurd as some of Vonnegut's later work, I was intrigued the whole darn time. As I penned this review, it currently stands as my favorite novel from the author. May I include that I cried at the end. Vonnegut's attempts to sum up human nature and their purpose are definitely worth reading about, and the book is filled with wonderful prose and well-written quotes that hold so much weight. I believe my bias is showing. Yeah, I wrote that review last May, and I gotta tell you that it is actually still my favorite Kurt Vonnegut novel. It is a good book, and like I said, I still feel the same way about it now that I did at the time. The book itself was written in 1959, and I gotta say, 60 years later, the lessons that it has are more relevant now than ever, especially with all this social distancing, all this uncertainty. Kurt Vonnegut really just tackles, the idea of what it is that we're supposed to do here in this life, in this world, in this planet. It's a great read, and if my enthusiasm did not give it away, I did give this book a 10 out of 10. I wrote that this book had everything for me: a great story, great characters, great ideas, and a great ending. I promise you, I'm trying to go quickly on these Kurt Vonnegut reviews because trust me, you're going to be hearing a couple of these throughout the segment. Okay, so next up is The Circled by Dave Eggers. This author has quite the repertoire and is even somewhat relevant in today's modern media. This book was written in 2013. It is a fiction book, but at its core, it's just like a familiar parable that warns the reader of developing technologies, and it emphasizes how easily we surrender our own privacy just to be part of these new technologies. The main character of the story starts a job at a highly praised tech company, think like Google or Facebook, and then the company, of course, is called The Circle. From there, we witness her descent into a world that is pretty much ran by technology and social media, and that descent into a world that is essentially without privacy is so gradual, it's so believable, that even if you've already heard this a million times, that the mantra that technology separates us, that technology, we lose ourselves in it, even if you've already heard that so many times, this is still an eerie story to read. Eggers is big on setting and scenery, so you will have to read through some long descriptions to get to the good stuff, but when you get there, goodness does that plot start rolling. I do think that the author's attention to detail plays a huge role in making the story fresh and believable. The book to me was remnant of the Netflix series Black Mirror, and if you haven't seen that, just know that it touches on humanity and its interactions with technology that is both strange and familiar at the same time. That definitely is this book, and by the time I was done with it, I was spooked. The balancing of appropriate transparency and outright invasion of privacy is actually a harder act than I had originally thought. I gave this book an 8 out of 10. The story didn't feel too original, but that did not diminish the importance of the overall message. I was entertained. This book was actually recommended and lent to me by a friend, and I am grateful for that. I do want to say that there is also a film about this movie that recently came out with starring Emma Watson and Tom Hanks. I have not seen that film. I actually wasn't even aware of the film until I was reading the story, and then someone said, "Oh, there's a movie about that." I have heard mixed things about the film. I cannot comment on the film, but I can tell you that I enjoyed the book. The next review is on another book by my boy K.V. Kurt Vonnegut. It is called Mother Night, and it was written in 1961. In this novel, we are taken into the mischievous, eventful, and absurd life of Howard W. Campbell Jr., the American-born Nazi who is in fact an American spy who writes fantastic plays and who is best friends with a Russian painter, who he himself is a spy as well, while getting help from one of America's most persistent racists, who is also a dentist and whose chauffeur is actually an African-American who is actually a Japanese spy. Oh yes, this book is an absolute adventure. There are so many twists and turns, and to be honest, he does it flawlessly. If that summary did not make any sense, listen to it again, or better yet, read the book. Here, I will let you borrow it right now. This book is full of characters that are so original, so eclectic, and just so Vonnegut. It had me laughing out loud in public, and then pages later, I was going through heartbreak. And then even more pages later, I found myself an absolute beehive of adrenaline and excitement. The book takes you everywhere, but it does it in an elegant, coherent way. And it does leave you with a multitude of thoughtful themes and ideas. One of the main lessons being, quote, "We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful of what we pretend to be." It was a great story, and I had given it a 9 out of 10. I guess I wish it was longer, but that is just me being selfish. This next novel was introduced to me by a friend who, in a letter, actually told me, "Maybe you should read something more than Kurt Vonnegut." Can you believe that? No, I'm just kidding. I'm very grateful that she exposed me to new writers. This next book is called This Is How You Lose Her by Junot Diaz. Now, I'm actually just going to read a little bit from what I had written down for this review. Junot Diaz does a great job at thoroughly and somewhat graphically creating and describing the life of Junior. Diaz involves lots of culture and ethnicity in his writing by taking the reader through an interesting childhood and destructive later years of the Dominican Republican main character. Diaz does this in a way that is unique by literally writing this book in different points of views and perspectives. In nearly every chapter, there is a change in prose, going from being told in the first-person perspective to then being told in third-person perspective, and then to second-person perspective, and then changing so on and so forth. Diaz does this so fluidly, and this adds to a unique, interesting dynamic to the overall novel. The story itself, though uniquely presented, is not so original. Junior is a troubled man stemming from his close but toxic childhood family environment, and his faults and insecurities are reflected on the way he treats women. There's a lot to learn from both Diaz's writing style and the characters he creates. The novel was full of descriptions and emotions, but falling short on that extra something that makes a novel go above and beyond for me. I gave this novel a 7 out of 10, though I do want to say it definitely was worth reading this book. So if I can just bump that up, I gave this review a year ago, and I'm going to bump it up now to an 8 out of 10. Because, again, not everything has to be about sci-fi or has to be so breathtakingly crazy to be enjoyed. It was a good book, and actually it almost was an important book. You know, it taught us a lot of lessons to show us that our insecurities do get reflected in our personality, even if we're not aware of them. The next review is on a book by everybody's favorite fiction/horror story writer, and it is Stephen King, and the book is The Shining. The book was and still is highly praised, and I had to see what all the fuss was about. Now, keep in mind that there is a movie for The Shining as well, and that too, it comes with its own fan base. I did not see the movie until after reading the book, so when I started reading this book, I did come into it with pretty much fresh eyes, a fresh mind. I had some idea of what the book might be about, but I didn't really know the details, and I was in for a loop. The Shining is quite the take on the haunted house trope. It mostly takes place in the Overlook Hotel, and a family of three stays there during a hard winter to take care of the building. The family members each start to kind of experience their own fears and their own version of paranoia and insanity as they are as they are isolated and quarantined in the hotel together. Now, this is not a story of the dangers of isolation. Do not worry. Some of these characters actually have a sort of sixth sense that the story conveniently refers to as the Shining. Though there are some paranormal aspects to it, this book touches on some real issues such as alcoholism and childhood trauma. King writes the story in a way that feels somewhat natural, and by that I mean that despite some of its mystic elements, the story feels as though you are reading about someone that you actually knew in real life. He gives so much detail, and that makes the characters just so much more realistic. The book was so thorough in helping us understand each character that even the villain of the story was a character that I thought was deserving of our human empathy. I mean, he is still a villain and he still does some evil stuff, so you can't feel too sorry, but King definitely blurs a line that I thought was going to be clear. The thing is that there is a ton of background and it does take a lot of patience to get to the real juicy stuff, specifically the exhilarating climax towards the end of the book. I know this is King's signature style to put that much detail in order to make his characters all the more real, but it can get tedious for those who have short attention spans and who are slow readers just like myself. Overall, I enjoyed the book and I gave it an above average score of 7 out of 10. The next story in my little review notebook is actually another story by Kurt Vonnegut, and this one is called Dead-Eye Dick, and it was written in 1982. Now, in order to be kind of just quick but still concise, I'm going to read just directly from what I have written on here. Kurt Vonnegut introduces us to yet another unique character with loads of absurd information and backstory that wobbles between far-fetched to chillingly relatable and current. This novel is full of Vonnegut's signature tangents and his worthwhile attempts to define, or rather, attempts to understand the vastness of life itself. The book is zany, to say the least, but it is written well enough to make the overall story and characters feel understood. It was a fun read, but not one of my favorite Kurt Vonnegut novels. It is like listening to a wacky bedtime story before going to sleep. This absurd story is in fact one of your favorite bedtime stories, and it is a joy to hear, but not the most defining pieces of literature that you have stumbled upon. I gave it a 6.7 out of 10. I know that's pretty specific. It was a really fun book to read, but it just happens so fast and it feels like it's almost forced at you. Still, it is 100% Vonnegut and has his style just written all over it. The next book was recommended to me and lent to me by a good friend of mine named Brooke. I am mentioning Brooke because she is just such a saint and I hope she is doing well during this quarantine. The book is called Machines Like Me by Ian McEwan. It was written in 2019, so it is fairly recent. Ian McEwan takes the reader into a fantastic alternate history in which there is an actual real-life scientist. His name is Alan Turing, who in real life he ended up killing himself. But in this book, he never actually killed himself, and AI technology just grows and grows. Charlie is the main character and narrator who purchases an atom, which is an AI humanoid of some sorts. The book paints a clear, chilling world, and it uses that as a background for a story that just has a multitude of philosophical questions dealing with love, machines, and just the very meaning or the purpose of life itself. I feel like the author did a great job at shaping the story so he can just present to us just ethical dilemma after ethical dilemma after ethical dilemma without making the reading experience overbearing. There aren't just things that are going wrong, going wrong, going wrong. It really takes its time to make us actually question what is going on. There are times when the author goes on this interesting flow of consciousness type of rant through his characters, and I like that. I think it's like a human thing to do. Sometimes our thoughts are scattered and they don't make a lot of sense, and I think the author does a good controlled job of portraying the main character's scattered type thoughts. I really did enjoy this book. It was a more personable, up-close look at these types of stories that involve humans living amongst machines. I did give this story a 9 out of 10. To me, it was a fun story that asks really important questions about what gives worth to life. This next book review is on a book that was written in 2002, and it easily became one of my favorite books after reading it. The book is called Lullaby by Chuck Palahniuk. This is the author who also wrote the story Fight Club. The novel is an interesting and graphic blend of both horror and suspense, with some odd, offbeat humor just scattered throughout the story, but it is done tastefully. The premise alone is just so out of left field. It is about a detective who stumbles upon a mysterious book that contains the Calling Song, which is a children's lullaby that is actually far from harmless. In fact, when read out loud, it kills whoever listens to it, not including the reader. The main character then finds out that there are copies of this book in public libraries all throughout the country, and he takes it upon himself to try and rid the world of this evil culling song. Wow. You meet so many interesting characters, and you delve into some other paths, including the mysterious narrator himself. The book is just so absurd, so surreal, that sometimes you lose track of what is real and what isn't. And though it may sound a little disorienting, I think Palahniuk really pulls off this balance of that which is real and that which is surreal. Another cool thing about this book is just the way that it is written. It's written in present tense, as though it's happening as you are reading it. Not, some story about some character remembering something that happened. No, it's happening to you as it is happening to the character. And I think that is pretty cool. Not a lot of stories tackle that type of perspective. So I do give kudos to the author for that. The story is just a perfect blend of absurdity. It's super weird, and I do appreciate that. I'm into that kind of stuff. And the whole time, though, the tone that the author creates, it's almost as though there's nothing weird about it, when there is clearly a lot of weird stuff going on. And I know the word weird is such a vague descriptor to use, but I'm trying to avoid using words like scary. The book wasn't scary, though it did have some weird, scary elements to it. I think that it was trying to not be just an outright horror book. It definitely is thoughtful, very thought out, and a very unique read. I gave this book a 9 out of 10. Now, I only have a couple more books to review, and if you have made it this far, I want to say thank you. I know that time is valuable, so I appreciate you spending it with me. As a gift, I guess, or a break from my voice, I'm going to play maybe like 30 seconds of just some avant-garde music. Let's go for it. Now wasn't that refreshing? Alrighty, on to the next review. The next story is actually a collection of stories, and it's called The Metamorphosis and Other Stories by Frank Kafka. Oh yes, this author, Frank Kafka, is actually well known for his story, The Metamorphosis. And let me tell you, that short story was pretty wicked. And usually when I say wicked, I mean it as a synonym for cool, but in this case, I mean wicked, just disturbing. It's about this dude who wakes up as a beetle, bug, cockroach type of thing, and his family freaks out, and eventually they just react negatively to his presence. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but the story though it has elements of like a horror story such as The Fly, it is actually very sad. It is very lonely. It's a lonely story. There are other stories in there, such as In the Penal Colony, that have just a bizarre, surreal atmosphere to them, which almost kind of borders into the realm of like a graphic novel. It was definitely a unique read. Though these stories are obviously well thought out, there was a little bit of difficulty for me to get through them. One being that the author is from Germany. He's a German author, Frank Kafka, And so these stories were all translated, and right there's already a bit of style lost from translation. And that just happens with translating books from different languages. Another thing is that this writer is from the early 1900s. So there was a little bit of a barrier as far as like how things were written back then and just the way people talk. Personally, that did make these stories a little difficult to keep my interest. So I did rate this book a 6 out of 10. I did mark here that Kafka is just, he's obviously a talented writer, but I don't think he was right for me yet. I did think maybe if I continue my reading journey, I'll come back to these and be able to see these stories in a more sophisticated light. But at the moment, for my reading level, for my interests, it just wasn't my cup of tea. The next reviewed book is a book that was actually recommended to me again by my good friend Brooke, and this one is called Invasion by Luke Reinhardt, and it came out in 2016, so it's kind of recent. The story, for the most part, follows this character named Billy Morton and his family as they accept into their lives this mysterious alien creature that is shaped and said to be described like a hairy beach ball, and they name it Louie. This little creature bounces up in response to them, and it all seems innocent. You know, they're like, okay, this is an alien and he's hanging out with us. So it goes. Eventually, more aliens like Louis start popping up all around the world, and they all seem to have just one goal in mind. They just want to play. And they just want to not take anything seriously. But unfortunately for capitalist America, that is blasphemy. This book was an absolute joy to read. From the first page, I could only describe it as a satirical roller coaster, and it definitely reminded me of Kurt Vonnegut. I know it seems like you've heard that name a million times already, but please don't let that scare you from this story. If you're not a big Kurt Vonnegut fan, I do recommend still reading this book. It was just a fun read. I found myself laughing out loud in crowded places at what was happening in this book. I couldn't believe some of the situations that they were getting themselves into. And though some of the things in the story seemed a little too crazy to actually happen, there was so many parallels, so many similarities in the way that the country was running. It was like a mirror image of the system that we actually have in place. And being that the genre is satire, we were able to see a lot of flaws with that system that is in place. Despite its silly nature, I actually find this book to be kind of important. It puts to light a lot of obvious flaws with our society and just a lot of irony that is present in our society. Overall, I thought it was a great book and I gave it a 9 out of 10. It felt like I was reading a bunch of articles from the satirical news group The Onion, and I won't get too into what The Onion is, but if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. And if that is your kind of humor, if that is your kind of thing, humor with realness to it, humor with important messages behind it, then I would recommend reading this book. Alrighty, next review, and I do want to point out that this is the second to last review, so again, I appreciate you sticking with me. The book is called The Wall, and it was written by John Lanchester in 2019, so it is fairly recent as well. The story follows a soldier that is living in this post-apocalyptic society. There's water surrounding this society. It's a little intense, and they have erected a giant wall in order to keep the others out. Eventually, the main character, Kavanaugh, gets banished out into the sea, and he and some of his other fellow soldiers actually become others themselves. I wouldn't necessarily call this a spoiler because you can kind of get this information on the back of the book, and along with the titles of the chapters kind of give away what's going to be happening. Now, there are some obviously political and societal themes that go on here, and as someone who is an avid listener of punk music, I love Fighting the Man as much as the next guy, but I do want to say that this story felt a little bit cliche. Good guy thinks that he's doing good, turns out he's doing bad, he changed his sides, blah blah blah. I have heard this before. The thing is that sometimes, themes are always regurgitated or always remade, and people can do it well. People can get away with making something, with a cliche message. Be nice to people, or be careful who you trust. That happens, but I think the author's particular writing style, it just seemed a little dull to me. Lanchester just put a lot of details into things that I didn't feel needed that much detail. Now, I'm all for someone setting up a good setting, a good scenery, but unlike unlike Stephen King, who perhaps puts a lot of details in order to advance our perception of the characters, I felt like the details put into this book really amounted to nothing. Okay, now I know that's a really powerful thing to say, and I mean, this guy wrote a whole book, something that I can't even imagine doing, so I shouldn't be so hard. But I guess what I'm saying is, I just wasn't really vibing with it. I do want to say that the person who lent me this book really, really enjoyed the book, so it is just a matter of taste. In the end, I concluded that there is just content out there that tells a similar story, but in a more interesting way, and I gave this book a 4 out of 10. Now, we are at the last review in this book. I do want to say again that I read books before this, and I read books after this, but just somewhere along the way, I did get a little lazy when it came to logging in these books. But it was nice to have a record of what I thought these books meant to me or what I thought they were trying to say. I think it's definitely a habit I want to get back into, and because, who knows, in the future, I might be able to share it not only with you guys, but with others who want to listen and find that information useful. So, the last book I reviewed on here is actually one of my favorites, and if you have not already guessed by this point, it is by the Kurt Vonnegut. Now, keep in mind, I've been talking about this author as if he is still writing today. He has passed away, unfortunately, but he left so much behind. And this book in particular is called Breakfast of Champions. One of his bigger books. It definitely was one of his more famous books, right next to another one of his books called Slaughterhouse-Five. And there's just so much to begin talking about within this book. It is just full of... Wait a minute. What is that? Oh my goodness! It actually seems like I'm getting a phone call from a good friend of mine, Leroy from down south. Actually, give me one quick second. Hold on. Oh my goodness! It's our good friend Leroy from down south. Hey Leroy, how are you?
Israel, how are you? It's been a goddamn minute since I heard of you.
Yeah, Leroy, it definitely has. Oh, be careful, Leroy. Watch the language. This podcast is for my school.
True.
But anyways, I was actually just about to start talking about Breakfast of Champions, the Kurt
Oh, that's a
Vonnegut book.
great
You
book
remember
there.
that
That's
one?
a great book there. Yeah, I feel like I've read
Actually,
that one before.
if I recall, I think you kind of got me into Kurt Vonnegut, or at least you were ahead of the game as far as
Oh, did
enjoying
I?
Kurt Vonnegut. Tell me about that, man.
Well, sheesh, that man, woof, man. That man is a wonderful writer. I thought that book was absolutely insane. I mean, that book's entire concept was about insanity. And I don't know. I thought it was quite interesting how he posed himself in the book many a time throughout the entire thing, you know?
Yeah, I
He like
agree, man.
writes himself into the situation. And first time reading that, I'm just a humble gentleman from the South, that confused me. That confused the Jesus out of me.
Yeah, his writing style definitely. You got to make sure you're paying attention to what he's saying for sure.
Yeah, and for sure, it really came all the way around when it made me laugh because that's what I realized Kurt Vonnegut's all about. He's posing these terrible situations in these characters' lives, but he wants us to laugh at them in a way, but not in a belittling way. It's just strange situations that he puts them in. I mean, there's one man he's just going crazy over the duration of the entire book, and then he's convinced he's the one and only Jesus incarnate almost towards the end. It starts wailing on his whole family. I thought that was hilarious. It reminded me of my uncle Cletus.
Oh, Leroy, I appreciate it. You couldn't have said it better myself, but I'm gonna let you go. I do got to get back to this. I was actually about to touch on some of those points, so I appreciate that
Wow.
segue, Leroy. It was great talking to you, man. Thanks for calling
You
in. I'll give you a
you
call
have a
back.
great evening. You
You
have a
too,
great
man.
evening,
Stay
Israel.
inside, social distancing. Leroy, thank you so much.
Don't want that Rona. I'll talk to you later, Israel.
Thank you, Leroy. Wow. What a nice guy. What a nice southerner. He has just the best set of hair. It's as long as the branches of the tallest tree you've ever seen. It's actually just as beautiful too as the tallest tree you've ever seen. I'm glad that guy gave us a call. I hope you enjoyed listening to what he had to say. So, as Leroy kind of touched on it, there are lots of interesting things that are going on in this book. On the surface, it is just a story of one man slowly going insane and finally snapping into the fullness of his insanity when he meets the fictitious science fiction author Kilgore Trout. But that's just a horribly broad overview of a book that tackles so many issues and ideas such as capitalism, creating, having empathy for others, and just the very intense concept of the randomness and the absurdity of life. The idea alone is just so intimidating to tackle, so intimidating to take on, and Vonnegut does it clearly and, in my opinion, successfully. If you really want to get down to it, I do believe that life is totally absurd and nothing really makes too much sense. We kind of just showed up here and started playing the game with the cards that we were given. No one had any choice in that. And no two people start with the same hand. Everyone is alive for the first time, and we're all kind of just going crazy in our own special way, trying to figure out this thing that we called life. This book definitely is a hearty helping of food for the brain. And one of the best things about it is, just as Leroy mentioned, the book is hilarious. Just the situations that the author puts his characters in are both very real and very sad, yet there is a comforting, humoristic aspect to how truthful these situations and ideas can be. It's almost as if the situation itself might seem improbable, but the way those characters got there is absolutely relatable. On top of that, the book is just full of doodles made by the author himself that accompany what is actually going on in the story. You might be thinking, what the heck, dude, you're getting this excited about some picture book? But trust me, this aspect of the story adds so much to the absurdity of the whole book, and this book is just not the type of picture book that is made for children. There was nothing that I thought that was way too obscene, but there are definitely some things that I can see being a bit offensive to some people, especially for younger readers. If you didn't see where this is going, then maybe I just wasn't excited enough. I give this book a 10 out of 10, and though this is my second favorite Kurt Vonnegut novel so far, it would be my first one to recommend to someone who's trying to get into him. Well, guys, we did it. We made it all the way to the end, and honestly, I am grateful that you are here. Not only did I get the opportunity to share and talk about things that I really enjoyed, but I also had the chance to reflect on some of these books and how they once made me feel. It was almost like looking through an old high school yearbook and seeing photos of old friends that I used to hang out with, but unlike my old friends from high school, I actually have most of these books just chilling on my bookshelf, so I could take the opportunity to enjoy them at any time that I want. Ever since the school year started, I haven't been able to read as much as I would like. I feel like that's just a story you hear from many others, but that's how it goes, and reading books does take a lot of time. One thing I do want to say, though, is not to let that discourage you from reading. Even if you just read a mere 10 pages a night, you will more likely finish a book at least on a monthly basis. That sounds like a good number to me. Look, I know this is going to sound sappy, but I truly think that reading is an important thing. It introduces us to perspectives, ideas, situations from all parts of the world, things that would have never really crossed the path of our consciousness. If I may open up to you guys, on a very personal level, I took up reading a lot more frequently after the divorce of my parents a couple years ago. I know that is an intense thing to hear, but reading was just such a beautiful way to not only cope with it, but to try to begin to understand. It created a larger sense of empathy for me. I got to understand the complexity of human beings and just their feelings and their thought processes. Even books that were totally unrelatable to me have added to my knowledge of the overall human collective experience. It's something that we're all going through. Everyone, and I mean absolutely everyone, has a story, and some people add bits of their own story into the things that they create. I am in a completely different place from when I was when I first was going through all these hardships. A much better, a more thought out, imaginative place. And I give some of that credit to books. To the books that I have read. Some of these characters become friends, some become enemies, and many of them become lessons. I encourage you guys to just pick up a book, especially during this time of social distancing. Also, there are books out there for everyone. If you aren't vibing with something, that is totally okay. Don't make reading this painfully boring thing to do. Just look for other books. It took me a while to really understand the type of books that I was really into, the things that caught my interest, but once I figured that out, it made reading such an easier thing to do. A book will fit like a glove if it's meant to be, trust me. And ask for recommendations. People love sharing their favorite books. It really gives you like an insight on just the type of people that they are, and it's just so fascinating. And on top of that, as an added bonus, it's a great icebreaker. If you're just meeting someone, you can talk about books just like you can talk about movies, just like you can talk about anything else in life. So please, if you have roommates, go ask them to share a book with you. And when this is all done, and if I ever see you out and about, I would gladly share any of my books with you, alrighty? Any of them. Hold me to it. I also wanted to just quickly suggest a website that I have ordered many books from for really cheap. And I know this might sound like an ad, but it's not. I'm actually just trying to pass some cool and good information to you guys. The website is called betterworldbooks.com. And they just sell a bunch of used books. You can find all sorts of titles there, and that is actually how I came across a lot of my own books, including a lot of my valuable Kurt Vonnegut books that I love so much. I got them all from that website. So, especially during a time like this where you can't really go anywhere to pick up a book, it's good to, or you shouldn't go anywhere to pick up a book. But if you're dangerous, you can try living that kind of life. But if you want to do it safely and get it delivered to you, you can go check out this website. It's a good little book delivery place. You can start reading at any time. Go find something on the internet, look up some books, and you'll might come across something fun on that website. And when things settle down, the library is also a heavenly place to start doing some reading. Listeners, I appreciate you allowing me to get real with you. I mean, that's the name of the game. We just all want some honesty, transparency. I plan to be doing a lot of hanging out with you guys during this quarantine, so I just want to make sure you guys know that this is a place for everyone to hang out, no matter what the heck you've been through. Also, if reading is not your thing, that's totally fine. In fact, you should know that this review list is super biased. That's just me. That's okay because, again, everyone has their preferences, and that is a beautiful, liberating fact. If you guys enjoyed this review, please let me know. If you guys have already read some of these books that I have reviewed, please let me know what you thought of them. Even if you didn't like the books that I loved, I love to hear that. No one's gonna get mad. We're just chilling, dude. We're just hanging out. I got my kombucha right here. You know how it is. Please, if you have any books that you want to suggest to me, shoot them my way. I love suggestions, and maybe I'll log onto their website, buy some new books, or who knows, maybe the book you suggest is gathering dust right here on my bookshelf. I have so many that I need to read, so many that I need to catch up on. So please let me know what are some of your favorite books. Alrighty, dudes. Thanks for hanging out. I will meet you here tomorrow, same time. Sound good? Cool. I'm gonna head out now and practice some of my la la la's now. Later, dude. Thank you for listening to Griffin Radio. We know these are weird times, but don't worry, we got you covered with tons of news and content delivered to you safely from all of us here at Griffin Radio. And just a reminder to stay home as much as you can, and to avoid touching your face and unnecessary surfaces, and to wash your hands often with soap and warm water for at least 20 seconds. Simple as that. Hey, we'll get through this. Thank you for listening to Griffin Radio.